Excel, the advantages and disadvantages, along with doing a basic demonstration of syncing from a TracerPlus application to an Excel workbook that I already have created. I also want to remind anyone, if you do have questions throughout this presentation, feel free to type them into the question panel, and we will address those at the end of the demonstration. Also want to mention that our next webinar is Tuesday, October 27th, and it's also on TracerPlus Connect, but with Oracle databases. So that would be a good one to register for if you're using an Oracle database, so you'll learn kind of the ins and outs of using TracerPlus Connect with Oracle. All right, so Excel workbook applications. Going a little bit through the advantages versus the disadvantages of using Excel. So some of the advantages are, obviously it's available on most business PCs and even a lot of personal computers and laptops. So it's something that most people have. It's easy to get started with. Creating a basic spreadsheet and then syncing data to is pretty straightforward. Easily syncs in batch or in what we call wireless batch, which is just the wireless sync with TracerPlus. So that's pretty easy to set up, as you'll see in our demonstration later. And then you can easily share data via email with other users in your organization. Some of the disadvantages are its limited functionality. It's not meant for large record sets. As you do add data and as your data sets grow, it becomes slow and it degrades. So as you add larger data sets and more data, the actual syncing with Connect gets slower and slower the larger that grows. It's not a true database, as it's just a workbook filled with a bunch of different worksheets, so it's not truly meant to work like a database works. So it's not always recommended for sharing applications or applications where users need multi-user access and syncing to that same database. So that's not really good for Excel and syncing with Excel sheets. It also has limited functionality with our TracerPlus Connect live profiles, which is our real-time. That's mainly because of the slowness of Excel. Using it in real-time mode, that slowness can portray to the user. So that's something you'd rather use a database for if you were going to use a real-time type system. So some of the popular and unique applications that are good for Excel. For your small to medium business, physical asset tracking or asset audits, it's a good fit. Internal package tracking, if you're looking to track packages that are received within your organization, it's a good application for actually internally tracking those packages as you deliver them to their end user. Check-in, check-out type apps or tool room tracking, that's a good solution for Excel. Some mobile inspections, as far as inspecting maybe lights or fire extinguishers or buildings, something like that. That's a good fit for Excel. Some field service applications can be used with Excel. And then finally, inventory or work in process are good fits for Excel. In terms of large business and institutions, we do not recommend Excel. You should really be using a database. At the minimum, Microsoft Access, but most cases, large organizations use SQL, MySQL, or even Oracle. All right, so a little overview on Connect itself. So TracerPlus Connect will consist of what we call profiles and processes. A sync process is the most basic level of syncing, where it actually defines a source to a destination of where you want to sync your data to. A sync profile is a grouping of these sync processes. You can group them together to execute certain functions, such as if you only want to sync data to a device, you can separate that in a different profile than when you wanted to sync data from a device, so that you didn't trigger all the syncs at the same time. You can kind of control what sync is done when with the different profiles, which I'll actually show you a little bit actually shortly when we do our demonstration here. All right, so this is our TracerPlus desktop, as I mentioned before, and so what I'm going to click is our samples to get one of our sample apps. I'm going to click Inventory Control, and then we want our inventory issue and receive. It'll give you a brief description and a screenshot of what the app looks like. We'll click Next, and then I'll import that. So you'll see that this project consists of 3 sessions. We have a receive product. That's for incoming inventory. We have our issue product, which is for outgoing inventory. And then we have our view product list, which is basically our inventory. So it's where our receive and issue sessions will access and post data to. So I'm going to go ahead and push this over to my device. I do have a device connected here to my PC, and I'm remote controlling. So I'm just going to deploy this application over to my device. And as you can see here from the deploy screen, you can deploy to both Windows Mobile and Android devices. We will be adding support for iOS devices in version 10, which should be due out sometime next year. All right, so if I pull up my device here, we'll see our 3 sessions of receive, issue, and our view product list. I probably do have some data here, so I'm just going to delete everything just so we can start fresh. All right, so we're all clear. So the object here, the first thing we want to do is get our inventory over to this device so we can start receiving and issuing product. So I've already created an Excel sheet located on my C drive here. I called it inventory. So if we open that sheet, we'll see that I do have some inventory in here already. So what we're going to do is sync that over to our device. So in order to do that, we need to configure our TracerPlus Connect to sync to and from this Excel sheet. So I'm going to go to our TracerPlus Connect software down here. We're going to go to Configure. Actually, I'm going to create a new project here. So once I create a new project, we'll have the option to create a new profile. So we have the option here to create a sync or live profile. So in this case, it'll be a sync profile, which will enable you to sync via the device in the cradle or execute a wireless sync if your device is connected to Wi-Fi or WAN. So one thing we recommend doing is linking a TracerPlus desktop to this profile, as it'll make it a lot easier for you to configure. So I'm just going to click that folder. I'm going to go into my projects, and I'll look for my inventory manage project. So that's this project here. So I'll just double click that. You'll see it shows up, and we'll just click create profile. So at this point, we can actually name our profile. So let's say this is our sync to device profile. So I'll just name that sync to device. Now I'll add a sync process to actually sync our inventory list from our Excel sheet to the handheld device. So we can name the process sync inventory. And our source is going to be where the data is coming from. So that's going to be Excel. And the next thing we'll do here is choose our Excel workbook we're syncing from. So I'm going to browse to my C drive, and I stuck it in a TracerPlus data folder. So we'll just double click that inventory file. Once we do, we will see that all of our worksheets appear in here. So we have a receive, issue, and inventory. So we want to select where is this data coming from. So we want to get it from our inventory worksheet. Now we want to configure the destination of where it's going. So in this case, it's going to TracerPlus on our device. And then because we associated our desktop project, we now see our 3 sessions that are available on the device. So in this case, we're syncing our inventory, so we want to sync that to our view product list. So once we do that, you'll see some mappings appear down here below. So this is where we can kind of control which column in Excel should this field in TracerPlus sync to or sync from. So we'll see here, if we look at the Excel sheet real quickly, in our inventory, we have location in A, part number in B, description in C, and quantity on hand in D. So that should be pretty much all set up in the same order. So the only thing we need to remove here is column E, since we don't need to sync that. So we have A going to location, B going to part number, C going to description, and then D going to quantity on hand. A few other settings we can configure here. If we look at our destination and look at options, we can choose how that data syncs to the device. So we can append that data. Since this is an item list, that's not something we'd want to do. So we could either overwrite or update existing. In this case, I'm just going to choose overwrite, as our Excel sheet will maintain our current inventory. So every time we sync, it should overwrite with the most current data. We also have some advanced options in terms of records per message. So if you are syncing a lot of data, especially with Excel, we would recommend sending this to a records per message of 100. This will enable that sync to take place a little bit quicker than if you were syncing 10 records per message. Since I'm dealing with limited data here, I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 10. In terms of the advanced side on Excel, or I should say on our source, if we click Advanced, the one important thing to note here, especially for Excel, is our start row. So if we look at our Excel sheet again, you'll see that the data actually starts on row 2, as row 1 is our column headers. So we want to set and connect that it should start at row 2 so that it doesn't sync our column headers as data. So we just change that to start row of 2. Excel also has an option to auto-detect column data types. So if your data consists of maybe a date or some sort of number formatting, we can actually auto-detect that column type and apply that when we sync the data. I'm not going to use that in this case, so I'll just hit OK. And I'll click Save, and we'll save this, we'll call it Inventory Sync. And we'll just save that. So now we've set up a sync process that's going to enable our inventory to be synced from our inventory worksheet to our product list in the TracerPlus application. So now I'm going to go back to desktop, and what we want to do is define how we want to sync this data. Do we want to sync it via Cradle? Do we want to sync it via network, via some IP address? Or we can actually sync through the Management Studio itself. So without any further configuration, I could do a sync at this point. So if we come over to Synchronize, you'll see these 2 options up here to synchronize Sync All or Sync Selected. So this type of sync is going to utilize the PC's Windows Mobile Device Center or ActiveSync connection. This can be flaky, so we don't really recommend this method. We would actually recommend initiating the sync from the device by adding a sync button. It's not to say you couldn't do this. If it works for you and it works best for you, you can go ahead and sync this way, but we would actually recommend doing this a different way, and that's what I'm actually going to demonstrate today. So if we jump back over to Desktop, and I go to my Project tab here, if we go to Connect, we want to add a host. So this is going to be a PC, server, laptop that the device should try to sync to when a sync button is pressed. So we want to define this host. If you're doing a wireless sync, you could specify the PC, laptop, or server's IP address or host name. Or if you're just doing a cradle sync, we would specify a name of PPP_peer in all caps. I am going to do a cradle sync today, so that's what I'm going to set. So now what we want to do is add a sync button on the device. So what I like to do is actually add a separate session for syncing. So I'm going to click our plus button here to add a new session. I'll call this sync. And then I'll go ahead and remove these additional fields as we don't need any fields in this session. Jump over to our form designer and start from a blank canvas. So the first thing we want to do is add our button. So I'll click this button control, click it on the form, and then we'll call this sync to device. So now what we want to do is define what this button action is. So that button action is what we call a do sync. So that's our sync button action. And then once we set that, we have a couple settings we need to configure here. We have our sync host ID and our sync profile ID. So our sync host ID is going to tell, once this button is clicked, it's going to say, hey, where am I syncing this data to or from? So that was that host ID that we just configured over here, or host, I should say. So you'll see it has an ID of 1. You could have multiple hosts here. It's usually common to see just one. But you'll see that's assigned a unique ID. So that one is host 1. So let's put that as 1. We also want to define which profile and connect that this button is going to sync. So if we jump back over to Connect, we look at our configure, you'll see up here next to our profile name, we have a profile ID of 1. So that's the profile we want to sync for this. So we'll set that to 1 as well. So I'll go ahead and build and deploy this to my connected device. And that'll reload TracerPlus. So now we have our sync session here. And one more time, let's look at our product list. So we have no data in here. And if we jump back over to Connect and I go to my synchronized page, this also gives you an activity monitor to kind of show you things as they're syncing. So if I jump over to our sync and click this sync to device, you'll see some activity take place behind here. So you'll actually see that I had left the Excel sheet open, so that's why our sync didn't take place. So that's one very important thing to note. When doing a sync to or from Excel, you have to make sure that that Excel sheet is closed. So let me do that sync again, now that we've closed the sheet. So see it's syncing 6 of 6. So I'll close that. And if we go back to our view data, view product lists, we should now have our inventory that we had on our sheet loaded to the device. So we have inventory located in 3 different stock rooms. Here's some of our part numbers and our quantities on hand of each particular product. So now we want to start issuing and receiving product. So we'll go into our receive. And if I enter a part number, it's going to give us a description of the item. Once we select where we want to receive this to, it's going to tell us what we have on hand already. So we have 10 on hand already. I'm going to add, let's say, 7. And I'll go ahead and click Save. We'll scan another item here. Our men's polo, we'll receive that to stockroom 1 as well. And we'll say we'll receive 3. And let's receive one more item here. We'll do a women's polo. Let's say to stockroom 2, which we already have 15, and we'll receive 5. All right, so now we actually have some received transactions. So if I were to go to view data, receive product, here is our 3 received product or received transactions that we just did. So this is going to keep track of the actual transactions we do, but it's also updating our product list or inventory with those new quantities. So if we slide over, we'll see we have some new quantities here. We have 17, 8, and then 20 for the items that we received. So now maybe we want to issue some product as well. So if I jump into issue product, scan that same part number, maybe I want to pull this from stockroom 2 instead. So you'll see we have 5, maybe we want to issue 3, so that should leave us with 2. And let's do another item here, which is our women's khaki pants from stockroom 3, and we'll issue 6 of those. And once again, if we go to our view data, we have our 2 issue product transactions. And if we look at our product list, we should now have updated quantities of 2 and 4 for those issues. So now we'd want to sync this data back to our Excel workbook. So what we want to do is create another sync profile. So I'm going to come over here to our Profile Explorer, click our plus button, click Create a Sync Profile. And then once again, we want to tie our desktop project to it. So look for our Inventory Manage, and we'll double click that, Create Profile. So we'll name this one Sync From Device. Add a process. So the first thing we want to do, let's say we'll sync our receive transactions. And that's going to be coming from TracerPlus in this case, since we're syncing from the device. And then we can choose which session it's coming from. In this case, it is our received product. Choose our destination, which is Excel. We'll choose that same inventory workbook. So in this case, the worksheet will be received since we're syncing our received transactions. And what we'd want to do is marry up our fields here. So part number received to description, quantity on hand we don't need to see in the received transaction. So we're going to remove that. And this lookup quantity is just used for looking up our current quantity on hand. So that's not needed either. The only thing we need in our transaction here is our part number, where we received it to, the description of the item, the quantity we received, and the date it was received. So once again, on the Excel side, in our advanced options, we want to make sure that we're starting at row 2 so that we're not adding or overwriting our column headers. In our update options, in this case, we want to keep appending to this sheet since it is a transactional type sheet. So every time a sync is done, we're going to keep appending to that as transaction. So because we're doing that, we're going to want to delete the data off of the handheld once we do a successful sync. So I'm going to click that Delete Data After Transfer. So on a successful sync, that's going to sync the data to that receive worksheet and then remove the data from the device so that it's not synced again and we don't get duplicate transactions. So that's it for the sync receive transactions process. The next thing we want to do is sync our issues. So we'll basically create a very similar process here, but we'll call it sync issue transactions. Once again, our source is TracerPlus, but this time we're going to sync from issue product. And we're syncing to Excel once again. So we'll select our same inventory sheet, our workbook. This time we're going to our issue worksheet. We'll do the same for our mappings. We don't need quantity on hand or this lookup quantity. Choose our start row. Option should be append. Over here, source option should be delete after transfer. So this will take care of our receive and issue transactions. So lastly, we want to sync our updated inventory to the sheet. So we want to update our product list. We'll call this update inventory. And this will be syncing from TracerPlus, syncing from our product list. And then we want to sync to our inventory worksheet. So once again here, everything is mapped correctly, except we don't need our column E mapped here. So since we want to update our inventory, we want to go to Options, Update Existing. We can even do an Update Existing append if not found if you're actually adding inventory on the device itself. So if it goes to do the update and it doesn't exist already, it'll just add that as a new row in our inventory. Now we want to choose how are we going to update it, or what are we updating based on. So really sort of updating based on a unique data set. So in this case, since we have parts in multiple locations, this update we want to do based on location, which is column A, plus the part number, which is column B. So we're updating the sheet based on the location plus part number being the same. Options here, we don't need to do anything here because we want to keep that data on the device after a sync. And lastly, let's just make sure we choose our start row here. Set that to 2. Let me just double check that I did that for this one. I did. All right. So now we can save this. So now we want to add a new sync button to our form that does a sync from device. So we can either create a new button, or I like to just copy the existing button since it's already a do sync. We'll call this one sync from device. So everything's going to be the same except for the profile ID. So we come back and look at this profile. You'll see that it has an ID of 2 since it's our second profile. So we want to specify to this button that, hey, that's the profile we want to sync. So we set that sync profile ID to 2. Now we'll just deploy that change. All right. So we have our data on our device. Let's just jump over to Connect and go to our Synchronize window. Let's go Sync and Sync from Device. You'll see some activity take place in the background. There's our 3 to our receive, 2 to issue, and then it's going to update our 6 inventory records. So if we open our inventory sheet here, so now if we look at our receive sheet, you'll see this was actually, I had 2 records in here before that I was demoing with. But here's our 3 transactions that we just added. So there's our part number, where it was received to, the description, how many were received, and the received date. We're going to see similar data on the issue side. So we have our part number, what room it was issued from, the description, how much was issued, and the date it was issued. And then if we look at our inventory here, you'll see that our quantity on hand have been updated with our new quantities. And if we jump back over to the device, and if we go to both the receive and issue product, we should see that that data has been removed from the device since we had a successful transfer. Our inventory is still intact, as we wanted to keep that on the device. We'll just close our sheet. So to reiterate some of the important points with Excel, is make sure you have this start row set. That's very important. And another thing that you probably don't want to do is go over to the data view screen. Just due to the slow nature of Excel and how external applications have to connect to that. You will see a big delay here if you go to this data view screen as it tries to load the sheet. So we would recommend not going to the data view screen when using Excel. And also would like to mention that although you can use live mode with Excel, it's not recommended due to that same slowness. You could use a combination of things, such as, you could get your data or look up your data from a database, but maybe you just wanted to post your transactions to an Excel sheet. So that could be a use case where you could use live mode if you're just posting to a transactional type sheet versus trying to look up data from an Excel sheet. So that may be a good fit for Excel. Even for syncing, you could, if you were dealing with large data sets, you could get that data from a database and then just sync your transactions to an Excel sheet for easy access or easy sharing of that data to different users or emailing it to different users. So that's really what I wanted to cover today in terms of Excel. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you learned a lot about how you can sync with Excel and some of the advantages and disadvantages when and why you should use Excel. But thanks everyone, and have a good day.